In 2016, Instagram introduced a brand new logo. The old Polaroid-style icon, one of the most famous symbols in tech, was gone. Media and designers reacted with a storm of mostly negative comments. Many people disliked the bright colors and gradients. I remember the strong emotional reaction this logo triggered in me. But why? iOS 7 had been out since 2013, filled with vivid colors and gradients. Hadn't Apple's design already prepared everyone for this? Take a closer look at other iPhone app icons. What's different about Instagram's icon? Both use gradients and single color symbols, but there's a key difference. Most icons use single color gradients from dark to light to imitate shading. Instagram, however, uses a multicolor gradient to mimic light reflections. These are two completely different concepts, and we'll come back to this later because it will genuinely surprise you. But first, how did the company dare to abandon such a beloved and instantly recognizable logo? iOS 7 had launched a redesign trend, and by 2016, Instagram was essentially already late with its update. The company kept its old logo because it had a huge and loyal audience, but by then the change had become necessary, so the decision was clear. When they finally redesigned as one of the last major apps to do so, they faced a wave of hate but didn't back down. Internally, the company believed they had set a precedent that would soon change the entire design world. And it will. In this video, we're diving deep into the story behind a seemingly small design shift that sparked a visual revolution. We'll trace how and why one app dared to change the visual landscape, why it couldn't have happened sooner, and unpack the surprising power hidden within a simple gradient. We'll also touch on how this boldness impacted design perception as a whole and even inspired the idea of bringing this aesthetic to physical objects. To understand all this, let's get down to basics. You know what a gradient is, right? One color transitioning into another. But actually, that's not quite it. Any color in itself is a gradient. Yes, color itself is the frequency of a photon's amplitude. But we won't dive into the quantum structure of color. It's not crucial for our topic. What's important is that color as a photon is singular. And a pixel also has a single color. But almost any physical surface, with rare exceptions, isn't uniformly covered with a single color. Firstly, we always have shading a gradient into a darker color. Secondly, the mixing of light sources with different temperatures. Thirdly, reflections colored light, bounced off surrounding objects. The result? Everything we see in real life doesn't have pure flat colors. Everything is alive with gradients. And what does the green of a tree leaf, which is actually a gradient, not a solid fill, have to do with computer interfaces and icons? A direct link. Interfaces have always, from the very beginning, from the first graphical interface developed by the US military in 1968 to iOS 19, imitated reality. Not completely, but only in those aspects that make interfaces easier to perceive and use. And we designers have long known that people feel more comfortable in environments that shaped their evolution. The sounds and smells of nature, the sky water bodies, and other genetically familiar places just feel more pleasant. Therefore, it's crucial for an interface, not just to devise the most logical interaction method, but also to create comfort, to operate with ways of perceiving reality that are familiar to us. That's why Microsoft's completely flat Metro design concept, devoid of shadows, gradients, and transparencies, didn't last very long. Visually appealing at first glance, it was simply an uncomfortable environment for long-term work. Meanwhile, iOS 7, though it shocked everyone and was dubbed Flat UI, was never actually flat. In some ways, it even became more dimensional than previous iOS versions. And gradients were everywhere. If these are such fundamental concepts, why didn't they emerge sooner? Because technology wouldn't allow it. A pure gradient on all devices was a staircase with noticeable steps between colors. Before that, it was often an imitation of transition through geometric patterns. Older systems shied away from gradients and leaned towards flat colors for this reason alone. Quick aside, I actually collect all these examples of old interfaces and dozens of other rare design finds in my free email digest. In the late 90s, LCD monitors with true color technology started appearing capable of displaying significantly more colors. Still not enough for full-fledged gradients, but small micro-gradients to simulate volume that was doable. I remember about 15 years ago adding single pixel diagonal stripes to every design to make everything seem more detailed and to mask imperfections, especially in places with gradients or shadows. The real breakthrough came with the iPhone 4 and its high pixel density Retina screen. Texts, icons, textures and colors began to look dramatically better than on any screen before it. This was in 2010. And as we now know, Apple was already deep in developing its new design language, which would be unveiled 3 years later in iOS 7. Apple wasn't the first to invent and popularize a flat interface for the masses, but they were the first to introduce a modern type of interface, simultaneously minimalistic, yet packed with an incredible amount of subtle complexity. With variable corner rounding on icons instead of standard, with blur effects and layering, with a sophisticated shadow system, and yes, with gradients. See the disconnect? We touched on it in the intro. In 2010, the technical capability arrived. In 2013, gradients were popularized by Apple. So why in 2016 did Instagram's new logo feel so alien? Why did it shatter convention so profoundly that many found it unequivocally ugly and an unnecessary redesign? How did we spend 6 years heading in this direction only to feel like we'd suddenly veered off course? Think of Apple, a name that means huge changes, making brand new things popular with an almost crazy attention to detail. iOS 7? That wasn't just an update. It was the birth of a whole new design era, a look that swept the globe, setting the standard for devices everywhere. But there's another side to Apple, isn't there? That iron fist of control. That constant push to make everything look and feel exactly the same. And so along with this revolutionary style came their strict set of rules, the infamous guidelines. Suddenly designers felt trapped. Single color gradients only. The orders seemed to scream from every page of their rulebooks. Creativity began to fade. They were told it was for a consistent look, for that sleek, unified Apple style. But what it felt like was being smothered. There was no air to breathe, no room to move, no space to truly create. And here's a basic truth. When you put on that much pressure, when you force such tight control on all that lively, messy human creativity, something has to give. Pressure like that doesn't just build. It catches fire. It explodes. And explode it did. Think about it, a major split in how people thought about design, a break from the main style just 3 years after it really took over. That's incredibly fast in our world. iOS 7 got its crown in 2013. By 2016, the rebellion was in full swing. This rapid speed up, it was a direct result of that pressure cooker, that heavy hand of control Apple had accidentally forced on the design community, leaving them desperate for freedom. I remember that time, well, those talks with colleagues, a shared feeling that something wasn't right, a sense that design had become boring. Pleasant, predictable, yes, but it just had no life anymore. You could almost touch the tension in the air, everyone wanting to break out of those limits. And Instagram wasn't just any app, it was a giant still using its old, realistic-looking Polaroid logo that people loved. And this radical redesign crashed right into a separate wave of user anger over the new algorithmic feed. All these things came together like a battering ram, not just cracking the dam of old habits, it completely smashed it. Sure, the media was confused. Many designers, too, were skeptical at first, even angry. Now, that new logo? It was a real shock. But look at us now. Looking back, its huge importance is crystal clear. This wasn't just any app trying to be different. This was Instagram, a cultural powerhouse. If a smaller player had tried such a radical change, it might have been ignored. Just a small note in design history, a passing trend. But Instagram's massive size plus that perfect storm of disruption forced the world to face this new direction. And you could really argue that because of that bold move, that key moment in 2016, we now get to see the lively, expressive, and, no joke, genuinely beautiful design styles from today's Apple and Google. They got a new sense of freedom too. So however you feel about Instagram or whole Meta, and let's be real, people feel very differently about them, you just can't deny how big that 2016 earthquake was. It wasn't just a redesign, it was a turning point that changed our digital world for good. Look at all these modern gradients. Yes, you might recognize them if you pause for a few seconds. But I'm sure some of them you see even more frequently, yet recognition doesn't come as quickly. It all comes down to the first mover advantage, creating a kind of protective field. Nobody wants to copy Instagram too closely because it's just too recognizable. As a result, that gradient became and remains unique, launching a whole new wave, another cycle of popularity that's happening right now. Remember that newsletter with rare materials I mentioned? If you're interested in getting a curated digest like that every 2 weeks, the link is in the description. This unique blend of 5 colors was so captivating to me that I even found myself experimenting, trying to translate it onto physical objects, imagining how such a gradient would look on, say, a sticker or even a simple everyday item like a bar of soap, turning it into a small piece of art. We see Apple with its Siri gradients shamelessly using almost the same colors we see from Microsoft with little alteration. Google uses a slightly more restrained alternative, but still it's all in the same ballpark. Yet none of them dare to come close to Instagram and its beautiful, unique 5-color blend. And you know what's frustrating yet incredibly telling? Look at the promotional materials for iOS 7. They are bursting with multicolor gradients. Everything Apple did with its communication became like that bright multicolored. But the HIG, Human Interface Guidelines, the rulebook for designers, not just a recommendation but a guideline non-compliance with which could get an app rejected, clearly stated that icons should be monochromatic with simple shading gradients. Essentially, Apple ignited a design revolution with iOS 7, but in their thirst for control, herded designers and themselves into narrow, strict confines. This is pretty characteristic of them, actually. And this very control created the vacuum, the boredom that Instagram so brilliantly shattered. The balance between evolution and revolution is incredibly tricky, and Jony Ive, Apple's chief designer at the time, knew this better than anyone. For more on this balance and Ive's influence, check out our video Apple Design, the Post-Ive era.